This is Fred Dust, and I'm here with a dear friend, Dr. Vivek Murthy. How you doing, Vivek?
I'm doing well, Fred. All things considered, I'm healthy. I'm actually living with extended family at the moment during this pandemic, and so all things considered, I consider myself lucky.
Yeah, no, I think we are all definitely quite lucky, I have to say. And I want to thank you for agreeing to kind of get together to have a conversation about what I think is maybe the most important thing we can be discussing, which is how to have greater conversations and making human connections, which I think is both of our missions. So I don't want to speak for you. I'd love you to talk about what your mission is, but thank you so much.
Well, I'd love for you to speak for me, Fred, because you're very eloquent. So you probably do a better job than I. No, but I too feel deeply connected to this calling of trying to strengthen human connection, and creating better dialogue is a key way to do that.
Yeah, and it's funny because we were just reading through the description of this talk, and one of the things that I want to call out a little bit is that you know, just from my perspective, historically, actually, I'll back up. Like when the first piece ran, like the Wall Street Journal basically was like, "Oh my God, this is the most futuristic thing I've ever heard." This book making conversation that I'm working on, and I was like, "There's nothing futuristic about this. This goes back millennia. Like humans have been in conversation with each other for thousands and thousands of years. We've been in conversations with animals. That's how we became apex predators and agrarians. So it's like I just feel like it's there. We just have to rediscover it and kind of pull it forward. It's our oldest non-lethal tool, actually.
It's actually a very, very important point because the quest for us to build like a more connected world and to create healthy dialogue is it's not an effort to transform us into something new agey or something that we're not. It's actually an effort to return to something that we knew much more instinctually, and I think still do know instinctually to this day. But to some extent, we've forgotten how to dialogue. Maybe we've never truly learned in some cases. Maybe we know deep inside, but it's been layered over with what society expects of us or what we've come to expect of ourselves by consuming, sort of the news or media or other examples of dialogue. But the bottom line is, as human beings, we were designed to connect with one another. We were
Yeah.
meant to be in a relationship with one another. And I think coming back to that feels extraordinarily important at a time where we are more divided and more separated than we really need to be or should be.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you and I talked about this a little bit before, which is that I right now, as I've been out doing lectures and stuff, I've been, at least since the new year, I've basically been saying I don't want to talk about the divide because one of the things in the book I talk about the factor just in life that there's this thing called frequency illusion. Do you know what frequency illusion is? I'm curious. Yeah. Maybe you can explain it more succinctly than I can, but
I don't know that I can, but I think it just general the notion that when we are alerted to something, we tend to see it more often around us, and we tend to think it's more common than it actually may be, just because our mind is attuned to it.
yeah, it's the
So it's like
phenomenon like when you
classic, like seeing 11:11 on the clock,
that
where
is
people are, yeah,
that was exactly the example I was going to give, which is like there's a lot of people who are like, oh, that's 1,111 angels. I have to say, I really pay attention to it. And I do notice that like remarkable moments happen during it, but it's really frequency illusion. It's like we're trained to see it. And so I think when we say things like divide, or we say things like the gap, or we say, it's like we start to see divide. And to be honest, like my perspective is that like the divide is more sexy for the news hook. Like the press wants to talk about that, and I think we need to be talking about things that are more relentlessly positive and where people make really amazing conversations happen.
well, I think you're right. I think we focus so often on the deficit, and there are more than enough reasons to be concerned about the future. But I think amidst all of that, like it's our connections with each other, it's our ability to have fulfilling moments of conversation that stand out as this extraordinary source of joy and just energy. And they can be renewing, like at a time where a lot of things feel draining. So I think you're right. It's our and the key other thing here to point out is that when we're talking about fulfilling moments of connection and conversation, it's not just the 1 hour, 2 hours that you spend on the phone catching up with a friend. It's about all the big and small ways that we connect with people that can be sources of light in our life. It's the momentary interaction with a security guard or a barista. It's the moment we may have, a few seconds to interact with the neighbor as we're driving by their house, where a simple smile, a simple gesture, an acknowledgement that you see somebody, that value them, can be so powerful in a world where so many people feel invisible.
I really agree with that. It's funny, like somebody taught me something once, which is like never hire somebody who hasn't worked in the service industry. And having myself like worked my way through college as in a gay bar, so really like in terms of like the service industry, you can imagine the kinds of things that happen there. But I have to say, like, I really believe you should be talking to the people who are working for you and are helping you, whether they're your nurses and doctors, or whether they're in the local gas station or the local bodega around the corner. It's like that. Those are really important conversations to have.
Well, they are. And, I think the pandemic has made that even more apparent to many people because, I think most of us, perhaps in our day to day lives pre pandemic, would have thought, okay, the relationships that really matter for us are those that we have with our close family and friends. And I think, yes, those matter, absolutely. But I think for many of us, like the power of those small interactions with neighbors, with coworkers, with strangers, even, those actually had perhaps much more of an impact on us than I think many of us may have realized. But they play a role in helping us feel connected to someone else, to feeling seen, to experiencing some joy, to having a moment of authenticity, which frankly feels good in a world where sometimes it can feel like you're always trying to be somebody else or live up to someone else's standard. So those small moments are powerful, and I think the reason they're so powerful again is because we're hardwired to connect. And when we
Yeah.
experience even a little bit of authentic, joyous connection, we respond to it, and it stays with us for a while.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's funny. I don't know if I told you, but we lost our dog. Our dog died 3 weeks ago, Suki, who was like she was a lovely like giant like creature. And she's 13 years old. And by the way, I will tell you, she taught us the right way to die. I mean, I'll really, do you have a moment? I'll just tell you this quick story. The day
Yeah.
before she died, she was walking around carrying a little stuffed animal by its neck gingerly in a way that she would never do before. And I was like, David, she's wanting to die, and she wants us to kind of adopt another puppy. And David's like, you're crazy. And then the day before the inauguration, which was a really hard day in general, I got out of my office and she was paralyzed. And I lay down next to her and I was like, I know you're planning on dying. It's like, and I just need you this week. Can you just stick with us? And somehow, while we weren't looking, she got up, even though she was paralyzed, turned her back to us, and she died, which was like genius. I mean, but the reason I bring it up is that she taught me everything I know about how to have conversations, because she was such a presence that people would just walk up to us on the street and want to talk to us, and it's how we made friends with all of our neighbors. Honestly, I think putting puppies on the floor of Congress would fix a whole bunch of problems that we have. So it's like, so anyway, that was called a bird walk, where I kind of walk around and I can't remember what we were talking about. Oh, but yeah, I think these local connections are like, I mean, I live in a rural community that didn't vote the same way my husband and I voted, and yet we're so connected to our neighbors and families and friends, and really have kind of leaned in to help everybody during this kind of last year. And there's such good feeling in this community. It's really remarkable.
Well, Fred,
Yeah.
I'm first of all so sorry to hear about your dog and about. I mean, that's
Well,
the loss of a
the
pet,
kick
the loss of a family member.
Yeah, the
That's.
kicker was that it was the year anniversary of my mother's death too. So it's like, so, I'm fine. I'm really fine. I'm fine. I don't mean to laugh, but it's like we came into a good February. It was a hard January, but many of us, I think, for a lot of people, January was a real rough one. I'm sure you had a rough January, or at least an interesting one.
Well, I think it was tumultuous, yeah, for a lot of people individually, and just for us as a country. It was hard, but what I love is the fact that you have found a sense of community, because you framed it as you living in a place where a lot of people didn't vote the way you and your husband David did. But the fact that you were able to connect so deeply with them, I think, is so beautiful, because I think this is actually where I think our relationships can be a gift, right? Because they can remind us of what is possible, of the beauty and that we have inside of us, and of our ability to see that beauty and to connect with it. Because there's so much of what is emphasized. I feel like when you watch the news or when you read the papers, is all this stuff that's different between us, and how we are, the friction that exists between us, and how we are so divided. But sometimes it's just a single conversation with a neighbor or somebody where you feel a connection that reminds you that there is something so much deeper than the positions we may hold on issues. There's something more ingrained in our humanity, in our common concern for one another, our concern for our kids, our desire to want to leave them a better place, a desire to want to be of service to others, to express and to give, kindness and love. Like, those are common human needs, and it's one thing to see those written on a piece of paper. It's a whole other thing to experience them, and that's the gift of relationships. They give us a chance to
Yeah.
experience love and kindness in ways that can be really transformative.
It's really funny because like as I've been going out and talking in the last kind of 6, 9 months, people have been like sort of assuming that I'm kind of really down on digital means of communication. And to be honest, like I'm not. Like that's not what I think eroded conversation. I think, interestingly, like our neighbor who hunts our property, because here you want somebody who hunts your property, who knows you so that they know your routines. Um, he he was deployed as an EMT into the Bronx during the height of the first wave of the pandemic, and we texted him every night. And when he came back, he came over and sat on our lawn with us, and he just cried. And I realized he was telling us stuff that he couldn't tell his wife and child because he couldn't make them feel safe if he did, but he felt comfortable telling us and using us in a good way to kind of to unburden. And it was amazing. And I think, by the way, Vivek, that's a really great reminder that, for places like New York City, that feels like they made it. It's like they made it with the help of like a lot of other people. I mean, people came from all over the country to make it. It's like we did it together, and people put their lives on the line for them. So
No, it's absolutely the case. I'm so glad that you were able to be there for your neighbor, and I'm so grateful that he was of service to New York at a time of great need. I mean, that in and of itself says so much about what's beautiful about humanity, is that when push comes to shove, we do step up for one another, like in our better moments, and we can be there to support one another. And I don't know how long these conversations were that your neighbor had with you, when he came back and you were on the front lawn. But I would imagine that even if those were brief conversations, that they would have been really meaningful, just to know
yeah.
that, hey, there's somebody that can be there for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, well, I mean, the conversation continues. It's funny. It's like I just realized now, as you said, that he was the one who found our dog Suki 2 years ago, when she got lost for 24 hours, and it's because she like came up to his house and scratched at his door, and like and he let her in and was taking care of her, and then and brought her back to us. But yeah, I mean, so it's like we've all been kind of helping each other, I think, in these different ways, kind of sort of spiritually, over the last kind of, I don't know, since we've been here. I'd love to ask you about a practice that you had when you were the Surgeon General. And if I remember correctly, like you were grappling a lot with anxiety and isolation and loneliness, and that meant that your people were taking on quite a bit of stress. And you used to do something that wasn't about talking, as a way to kind of start your conversations. Can you remember what that practice was?
You mean the meditation practice that we
That's
have,
right.
Fred?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
This was really this is important for us. It was, in a sense, a way for us to get out of our own way, to let the stress and the worry, to let the exhaustion all settle, and allow ourselves, as we sort of originally were, beings who were passionate, who were excited, um, who were, compassionate, supportive, allow that part of us to really come out. And so this meditation practice was something that, many of us took on. It wasn't something that was required or anything in the office, but it's just a tool that we provided some people if they wanted to get some instruction in it. And then on their own, many people meditated, and some people ended up wanting to meditate together from time to time, and so they did that. But what it helped us do was to reconnect with who we wanted to be. It helped us to recenter ourselves. And the challenge I think we have in life in general, and that I've really struggled with in my own life, is figuring out, like, amidst like the fast-paced craziness of the world in which we live, like, how do we anchor ourselves? How do we center ourselves? It's like being in a hurricane. We're in a hurricane every day when we get up and wander out into the world. But how do we make sure our feet stay firmly planted on the ground? And everyone may have a different technique for doing this that works for them. Meditation was one that worked for us. But for other people, exercise can be really grounding. For others, it's time in nature that can be deeply grounding. And for many, if not all of us, it's moments of true, authentic connection can also be really grounding, because when we connect deeply with somebody, it's almost in a way that, in some cases, is a way of holding a mirror up to us and letting us sort of see and experience ourselves as we truly are. And often it's a reminder to us of what we can be. Sometimes when I've had a really good conversation with an old friend after a long time, I'm reminded, that I can be a good listener. I can be compassionate and empathic, and I can be vulnerable enough to allow somebody to share their love and compassion with me. And there are times where I go throughout life and I forget that, because I'm so stuck in operating in a world that doesn't always support those kind of values. So those are, we approach this in a lot of ways. Meditation was a tool that worked for us, but I think all of us need some anchor that helps us stay rooted in who we are.
Yeah, no, it reminds me of another practice of another friend, who the former Prime Minister George Papandreou, who's a good friend of mine, and one of the things he said after he left government, he and I had dinner at Lincoln, which was a fancy restaurant in New York at the time, and I was like, what would have happened if you could have slowed down and taken a breath before, while you were in the crisis? And he was like, if we had slowed down, there wouldn't have been a crisis. And he talked about the fact that basically he would say something, and in a press conference, and somebody would mistranslate it in the back, and around the world it would hear that they basically something like Greece is bankrupt, when he was saying we are not bankrupt. It's like, so it's, I think his reminder and your own, because I think it was very short. You would have a 45 seconds of quiet, like you would just ask sometimes for like a little moment of silence before a meeting started. Those things are really helpful, and that's helpful both in terms of like crisis decisions, like not making bad decisions. It's also helpful in reminding you that there are other things that need to be thought of in the world. But I also feel like one of the things I've noticed, I went for a long walk in the snow. It's very snowy here. And yeah, the other day, and we did a silent walk, my husband and I, for 2 hours. And I realized even in silence, you hear other voices. Like you could hear the snow falling, you could hear the birds calling, you could hear something howling. And I think that's true even in our own lives. Like when we are silent in a meeting for a moment, we hear people we wouldn't hear otherwise. So I think there's so many reasons to incorporate silence and pause into a good conversation.
That's a really, really true. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because we have a very clear preference, culturally speaking, in the modern world for volume, for loudness, for like, even just think about what's our picture of a good leader, right? We
Right.
typically think somebody who's speaking up a lot, who's taking up a lot of space, who's got the right answers, who's taking charge at meetings. It's not always necessarily the case, though, and a lot of times we lose something when we're speaking too loudly. And I'm reminded of the thing about silence is like, it's what you said. It gives room for other voices to be heard, but it also allows us to slow down so that we can
Yeah.
see things more clearly. When I was Surgeon General in the beginning, I remember I had some trouble with my shoulder, and I was going to see a physical therapist. And he was teaching me some exercises to do. And he said, just remember when you do these exercises that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And he was just reminding me to say that don't focus on just quickly like doing the reps or doing like your exercises or your stretches. Do them slowly. If you do them slowly, you do them smoothly. If you do them smoothly, overall, you'll get it done more quickly, but the results will be better. And I try to remember that at times where I feel like the urge to just speed on, to go fast and knock things out. Um, but slowing down sometimes can be what helps us see more clearly and react more effectively.
It's really interesting because I think about the idea of like healing a little bit there, which is, it's just like I basically had a situation where in my 20s, I broke or I tore every ligament except for one in my ankle. And they were going to do like emergency immediate surgery. And I was like, I don't want to do surgery. I really don't. And it took me a year of physical therapy and whatever, but my ankle is perfect. And I really like, I didn't have to go into surgery. And I think there's something about slowness that's also really about healing and kind of reflecting and all those things. While I have you, I do have to ask you, like, so you were Surgeon General. If something were to happen and you suddenly were Surgeon General again, what would you be? What would have changed since last time I saw you? And just remind me really quickly. Vivek and I worked together. He was about to do I think it was an epidemic of isolation and loneliness in America. I was trying to help him with some of his conversations, and then I got a like bounce back email one day from from Vivek's email because I think you'd been fired. But I uh, I also said that Vivek and I also wrote our book proposals at the same time, which was really interesting, and I think sold within like a short window of each other. So I feel like in a lot of ways our work has been a kind of like a call and response back and forth between it. But knowing that that's where you were. Where would you go if something were to happen and you were suddenly prime minister? If you were suddenly if you were prime minister, if you were Surgeon General again?
Well, I think one of the things that was really impressed on me during my last time tour of duty in government was, and even in the years since then, in speaking with communities, is just how important relationship is as a foundation for everything else that we build. You can see that even right now during the response to COVID, where the fact that we don't have as strong a connection between one another as we could have makes it harder to have a unified response, makes it easier for us to be divided at times or to make a response politicized. And that has profound implications for how we respond to the pandemic. But even beyond this pandemic, if we want to take on big challenges as a society, if we want to address economic inequalities, if we want to address the disparities we have in health, if we want to address climate change or any other major crisis that may come our way, it takes us being able to work together, to come together, not necessarily agree on everything, but respect and value one another enough to be able to recognize that we need to look out for each other's welfare. And what that is, sort of come together to mean for me is that if we don't have the ability to dialogue with one another, then we can't create that kind of unity. And ultimately, relationship is the foundation for dialogue. Like you can't just throw a bunch of people who have different views together in a room and say, okay, find some common ground. You've got to find ways to build relationship first, help them connect and dialogue so they can see themselves more clearly as human beings who have common concerns. And that hard work of building relationships is the work of building community, of strengthening the country and the world. So that to me is the important work that we have to do now. It's where I would tend to focus, if I was, serving in government again. And even if I'm not, it's where I'll continue to focus. Because again, I want my kids to inherit a world that is full of opportunity, that's full of possibility, where people will embrace them, where people support one another. That can only happen if we recognize relationships for what they are, which is the building blocks for a successful, healthy, fulfilled society.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of build off that, I think as we end, I guess I will say that like one of the reasons why I talk about making conversation is I think that the reality is that we need to be thinking the most as conversation as like the most creative act we do. I mean that we can, it's like the ways that we actually get through these hard conversations is by making a plan for them, is by kind of like setting the right kinds of rules. But the reality is that the reason that's making conversation is like we're all makers. We all can do that. You've made your bed this morning, hopefully. Like it's like you can figure out a plan to make the conversations happen you need to make. So I'm just glad that I get to be in conversation with you.
Well, Fred, I love it too. And it's been so nice to talk to you. And I'll say that this is a great note to end on because it's a profoundly empowering note, right? It means that in order to be a healer, in order to help not just repair the world, but draw out the best of the world. You don't need to have a special degree or a medical license or anything of that. You just need to be human, because as humans, we have the ability to build relationships and make conversation, to create dialogue. We just have to be willing to understand how to do that, to remember what we've known for thousands of years, and to make that a priority now.